Last week, Alderman Jack Coder joined us here live on the record to convey his pitch to voters leading up to November 8. As he tries to become the next Board of Aldermen president, he'll be facing Megan Green. The next head of City Hall will lead that chamber through more tumultuous times on the city's horizon. Federal prosecutors already indicted 3 members there, and in the spring, voters will again whittle their ranks in half as the new map doubles the size of districts and divides the number of aldermen. Joining us now live on the record is Alderwoman Megan Green. Thank you for joining us.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
There's never a good time for a mass shooting or a school shooting. Of course, it comes right as voters get up to make up their minds. This school shooting in St. Louis will be fresh on their minds as voters walk into the ballot box, but also as they look to their elected officials for some sense of guidance through this this grieving, I should say. What could you do from your perch, should you become Board of Aldermen president, to make sure school shootings don't happen again?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to look at the root causes of this, right? So, you know, what we saw in this is, you know, the police response was phenomenal. They were there within 15 minutes and disarmed the individual. The school had appropriate security and guards on place. I mean, everything, all of the precautions that needed to be in place were there. But what wasn't there was, I think, a recognition of what this kid was going through. You know, as we read his letter that he left behind and the loneliness he was feeling and the disconnectedness from society and the obvious mental health crisis that this kid was having, we miss that. And I think that speaks to a need to greater interventions in, you know, for mental health, destigmatizing mental health.
Put a finer point on that for me if you can. What does that actually look like in its application?
So I think it looks like a variety of things. I mean, making sure that we have adequate mental health resources in schools to identify kids that are struggling or who have trauma and align them with those resources.
Could the school have plugged him into something more directly? Or
I think, you know, the issue I often find, you know, in schools is that there's not enough resources. It's not intensive enough for what a lot of kids who are really struggling or who are living in trauma need. But beyond schools, because this person had been outside of school for a year, I believe, I mean, our community needs more investment in mental health. I mean, it can be very difficult to get into counseling, especially if you are somebody who is uninsured or underinsured, to be able to find a counselor, to afford counseling, and to get those ongoing mental health supports that you need.
Many of these debates, public policy debates about mental health, about gun control or gun safety measures, and about the holistic approach, these aren't new debates. These are debates that we've had for a long time, but often a candidate's positions are tested through times of trial. 4 years ago, you ran for this same position, and you said this. Take a listen.
What role, if any, do you believe is the appropriate role of police officers in schools? And we're going to start with Alderwoman Green.
Quite frankly, I don't think that there is a role for police officers in schools. I think that there's roles for social workers and mental health workers in schools. I think that there's roles for mentors in schools.
Do you still believe that there is no role for police officers in schools?
So I think we have to make a distinction between the unarmed public safety officers that we saw in the schools and police officers. And I think we have to recognize that the role that the school to prison pipeline can play when we do have armed officers that can put kids into the criminal justice system from our schools, and the negative impact that can have on students for a long term.
So the perception that they have is different if it's an armed police officer versus an unarmed, or even some cases an armed school resource officer?
Correct. And once a student is in the criminal justice system, they often view themselves differently. They see themselves as being a problem, as somebody who's less than, and it actually encourages the behavior to continue. And we have tons of research on this that tells us that this is true. And so there are ways that we can do school discipline to make schools safer that are not criminalizing the kids that are in our schools.
I don't want to only view the broad long term through this moment. We are in this moment, though, about public safety, and people are looking at that. You wrote in a recent blog post that St. Louis police only solve about 25% of murders, well below the national average. And you highlighted that they only spend roughly 4% of their workday preventing violence. Let's dig into each of those ideas that you raised one by one. Is it really fair to question how much time police officers spend on their day in violence? It's not like they get to decide when and where violence happens, or it's not like violence is literally happening all day 24/7. What point were you trying to make there?
So the point I'm trying to make is a lot of the things that we're asking our officers to do right now are actually not things that are under their purview or things that they're trained to do. You know, they're things that we need social workers to do, or mental health counselors, or homeless outreach workers, or substance abuse counselors to be working on. And so the point that I'm trying to make is we should be hiring those professionals who actually are trained to engage with those types of issues and individuals to address those issues, because that will then free up our officers' time to spend it on actual crime, to spend it on violent crime, which is where they should be focusing their time.
You highlighted the murder solve rate. Said
Yeah.
it was at 25%. Other parts of the country are much higher at 60%.
Yeah.
Of course, if you can solve a murder, you might prevent a future one.
Correct.
But why raise that? Are you blaming police?
I'm not blaming police at all. What I'm also pointing out in that statement is that if we take a lot of these things off the plate of police that they're doing right now, that other professionals could do, it frees up their time to actually work on homicide investigations, to actually work on violent crime, and not be
Time
focusing
management, essentially.
time management. It's how we allocate our resources and make sure that we are using our police resources effectively, and we are using other professionals who are more trained to deal with some of these quality of life issues or issues associated with poverty, to actually dive in and help those individuals.
You're running for this role at a time, a very interesting time in the city, when federal prosecutors just brought indictments against 3 of your former colleagues for the way that they took cash bribes in exchange for public funds, public incentives, tax incentives, these development dollars that the city
Yes.
was doling out. That's an interesting discussion. One county police officer just this last weekend told me that the two go hand in hand.
Yes.
The better you can create jobs and businesses, there's an old line, nothing, I forget how it goes, but you give someone a job and you take a gun out of their hand. You know,
Yeah.
put a shovel in their hand, there's no gun in the hand.
Yeah.
Do you see those two as intrinsically tied together, public safety and economic growth?
They absolutely are. I mean, we know that, I think it was Aristotle that said that, you know, poverty is the root of crime, right?
I didn't expect an Aristotle quote on this program.
You know, I always try to bring something new. But the point, I think, stays that, you know, when you address poverty, when you make sure people aren't hungry, when they have their basic needs met, you see crime go down. And you see that in communities across this country, across the world. And that's what we've been missing in St. Louis, is we only spend about a little over 1% of our budget right now on health and human services as a city. You know, that means that we are undercutting homeless services, affordable housing, mental health services, substance abuse services, all of these things that we know are essential to actually prevent crime. And that's what I want us to be focusing on, is that crime prevention piece that we have long been leaving out.
Government budgets can often be a moral document that say where the city's collective priorities lie.
Yeah.
And I want to play for you a soundbite from the Board of Aldermen just last Friday as they met. One of your colleagues, Tom Oldenburg, speaking a little bit about that as the city was getting ready to allocate more money to a local taxing district, but it was how that money was being divvied up and spent that he was zeroing in on. Listen.
We are witnessing a trend. Now, this trend is a retreat from progressive politics as it pertains to anti-policing, the defund the police movement, the reimagine, do more with less cops movements that we've seen throughout our city. The trend is not lost on me that we've had very progressive members of this board seek private public safety protection through the use of these taxing districts. We're seeing the reversal and a retreat of an anti-police movement, because at the end of the day, folks want protection, and they're going to do it themselves. We are witnessing a trend.
Do you see that? The rest of his quote there was, they're going to do it themselves. Do you see that retreat that he describes away from progressive politics in the city hall, or is he wrong?
I absolutely do not. I mean, when you look at the testimony of Alderwoman Schweitzer, who was looking to forward this deal, they actually, or no, this one was Annie Rice,
I believe you're right.
I believe. Alderwoman Schweitzer we had a few weeks before.
It was Alderwoman Rice is correct, yes.
But what they did that I think is quite different from the way that these taxing districts have been set up historically is they delineated how much of the tax dollars could be spent on each area, and it actually reduced the amount that was spent on the policing portion of it, the security portion of it, and it increased the amount that would be spent on community activities, community building, things that actually address those root causes of crime.
We sometimes distill politics into buzzwords. Your opponent has said, well, you want to defund the police. You heard Tom Oldenburg there say, do more with less cops. We're seeing all these little buzzwords and lines come out here. I wonder, though, can a person believe in pursuing more police with higher pay and better training and what you're calling for, this expanded social support system? Why do the two have to be at conflict?
I mean, they don't necessarily have to be a conflict, except for the fact that we have limited resources as a city. So I think it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are spending those resources wisely. So when we are already one of the highest staffed police departments per capita in the country, I think we have an issue with allocating our resources, not so much the number of police resources that we have. Now, we need to look at how this police department is structured. Let's restructure it so it's not so top heavy, so that there's more cops that are actually out on the street. And let's get the things off of the plates of police that really aren't things that they are trained to do. All of those mental health calls and homelessness calls and substance abuse calls that are better addressed by people who are trained in those areas.
A lively discussion. Thank you. I want to give you the same opportunity we gave the Secretary of State before we let you go. Is there anything you'd like to say to those people in our audience, or maybe the families of those grieving what happened in the school in St. Louis before we go?
You know, I definitely, to the families, this has been an incredibly difficult week, I think, for all of St. Louis, and our hearts ache. And my role as president of the board will be to make sure that this never happens again. And we have to recognize that even outside of school shootings, we have to be addressing gun violence. There's a program from Richmond, California called Operation Peacemaker that saw, 55% reduction in violent crime over 5 years that I think we should be bringing here. We have strategies, national strategies that we know that work, that can prevent crime. We have to be willing to have the leadership with the vision to incorporate these proven strategies into our own public safety strategy.
Alderwoman Megan Green, we're running out of time, but thank you for joining us.